Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of our mini-series on the pursuit of knowledge, where it comes from, what it means, and why it can sometimes get dangerous. Today, we're kicking things off going way back to ancient thinkers like Aristotle and someone who was inspired by him, Boethius, to see how some of the first written texts approached the desire to know everything. Were they optimistic? Were they cautious? And what can we learn from these warnings they left behind? Let's dive into the roots of this obsession with knowledge. Okay, so to kick off our first episode, I'd like to introduce two of my most fondest SCLA classmates, Shlok and Gigi.
Hello, I'm Gigi.
Hi, I'm Shlok.
All right, and so to kick things off, I'd like to go over Aristotle's Metaphysics, really a foundational book in the idea of philosophy and the pursuit of knowledge. So one question here is, what was he really trying to accomplish? I mean, there was Plato, who we really base a lot of his text upon, his idea of forms and whatnot. But Aristotle really disagreed. So I think, what was he really trying to accomplish with the metaphysics?
Okay, so I think Aristotle wanted to study being in the most general sense, not just physical things like in physics, but what it means to exist at all, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. I think just to add on to that, he was kind of he wanted to use metaphysics as basically the first philosophy that everything else can be based upon. And he focuses a lot in the book, from what I understood, was in causes and principles and cause and effect. He lays out the primary movers and things like substance. Substance is a big part of metaphysics, and he argues that substances are like primary beings, and he explores what makes a substance versus like what it's actually made out of. So yeah,
I think he also really plays on an important topic of really God, how he calls it the chosen mover, and really trying to understand why things exist. I think he really based a lot of his text upon that.
So kind of on the topic of God, do you guys think Aristotle believed in God? And if so, what type of God do you guys think he believed in?
I don't think he believed in God in sort of a religious sense. He believed it more of a philosophical sense, someone that really created all things to be as they are. Not that they had some sort of history or reason of doing it, or that they were all-knowing or all good, as we see very cultural themes with God today.
Right.
I think it was more of just a more robotic sense, not to put it that way, but almost as if it was.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Also, I want to add on the unmoved mover in the book itself. I think Aristotle argues that there must be a first cause to something, and being that causes motion without itself being moved. This is what he calls the unmoved mover, or prime mover.
And I think, just to add on to that, I think I don't know if Aristotle, if you just dropped him in today's time, I don't know if he would necessarily agree with any of the religious ideologies present today, because in his mind the unmoved mover is kind of a very abstract concept. But in today's religions, we have very specific descriptions of God or gods. So I don't know if he would agree with today's version of God throughout the different religions we see.
Those are very good points. Okay, now to move on to the more dangers and consequences part. Now that we've really built on a foundational text of philosophy, we can now move on to the more dangers and consequences of the pursuit of knowledge. So that's where we go into Boethius almost 1,000 years later, but someone who was very, very influenced by Aristotle. He translated his books so that people today could read them and learn from them. So I'll start off with a quote from Boethius, where he says that the greatest misery of all is to be governed by desire and not by reason.
Yeah, that's a really interesting quote. I think in kind of layman's terms, what he's trying to say is it's an issue when you're pursuing knowledge, and you let your feelings dictate what you're thinking rather than using logical and rational reasoning. And I think it's a good point, because if you're going into, if you're researching something, or just any pursuit of any knowledge, if you already have preset biases or things of that nature, then it becomes a problem, because it removes the objectivity from the knowledge that you're trying to pursue.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like, in simpler terms, like, the problem is when the want takes over your life and dictates your choices.
Yeah.
You know, instead of like what your brain is actually thinking of, like continuing and like developing.
Right, because I think, especially in today's terms, if you're trying to do some sort of case study or some sort of experiment, you don't want to have the bias where you're only trying to find evidence to support your claim. Right. You also want to make a well-rounded thesis and claim, and not just be self-focused onto just trying to find something new and trying to skew results into that direction. So I think almost 2,000 years ago today, that's a really good point that Boethius makes, that like even today that we can still learn from and use, that the most modern of scientists still use.
Yeah.
And another quote that I wanted to...
just real quick, another thing to add. I think it's pretty like, I guess, commendable in given the context in which he was in. Like, he was in a prison, wrongfully, put in there. But for him to have that, clarity of mind, he to say like, oh, let me think of this, rationally without getting my feelings involved, even though he might have been having like, a lot of maybe depression or anxiety or just anger in general, for him to say something like that is pretty commendable.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this also has to do with a fictional character that he introduced in the Constellation of Philosophy called Lady Fortune.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about Lady Fortune, it's like a wheel of fortune where sometimes you have good times and sometimes you have bad times.
Mm-hmm.
This is very relatable to today's society where, you're not always going to see sunshine every day.
Right.
You're going to have to go through the good and the bad. And obviously, you should never always hope for good things just so it to be. You always need to work hard and not just hope for fortune, because you will see people around you with good fortune who didn't work as hard as you. Mm-hmm. But you must still persevere and go on. And that's also another thing with the pursuit of knowledge, is that if you're ever going to really try to dive into a specific field, you can't just go into it with the idea of, oh, just because if I try to go into it with this thesis, I will find something new. You can't really do that. You're going to get lucky sometimes and you're not going to get lucky the other times. Right. And so Boethius does a really good job in really focusing on this danger of philosophy and how to really mitigate it. If you guys have any other thoughts.
I mean, to add on to that, I think another point he makes, which really stuck with me, was how fortune isn't something that you should base your happiness on. So, in life you'll have your ups and downs, but he says that, happiness isn't defined by wealth, power, or fame, because these things don't last. And I think it's really important, especially in like today's world where materialism and money and all this stuff is at the forefront of everyone's minds. I think it's really important to keep this kind of mindset where your internal happiness should not be defined by just having, good or bad things in your life. And I think that's really
I agree. Like, I think a good message that Boethius gave us is just to not trust fortune. Mm-hmm. And like true contentment lies in like wisdom, virtue,
right,
and like non-fortune's like fleeting gifts that it gives us. It's not like we can't trust the randomness of it. You have to like believe in yourself and what you can do in the situation.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. These are very good points for our first episode on the background of the dangers and consequences of the pursuit of knowledge. And for next episode, we're going to be jumping almost 1,000 years forward and talking about a story where the dangers of knowledge become very real and very human in the form of Frankenstein. Thank you.